I'm back.
I'm back too.
And he's back too. Yeah, Levi, grandson of Armour. Yeah, when he knew one of these things was coming, no, not me, it, he wanted to be in the party, so to speak. And I thought, well, why not? You know, it's better than buying him a present. He can once a year come down here and be on a video. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what's it all about? Well, today it's all about this awesome amplifier. What is it, Levi?
It's an EVH 5153S.
You mean a 5153S?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the S for?
It's for stealth.
Stealth. Yeah. Stealth.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got that ring to it, hasn't it? Stealth. Can you do it on low end?
I can't
Can't do it.
It's not me.
Oh. So anyway, like he says, it's an EVH 5153S for stealth. It's 6L6 tube based, which it is. And they do reckon that this is probably the last amp that Eddie Van Halen was really involved in before he faded away. R.I.P. Eddie, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we're not here to look at me and him. I know we're nice looking, aren't we? Yeah. But we're here to look at that. So what I'm going to do, first job, is get this thing out of its case. No more waffling on. Let's have a look at what we came to see. Well, I snapped his fingers. He did scream a bit, and here it is. Awesome. Let's go in closer and look at the whites of its eyes. I think it's a real good plan. Yeah, looks pretty cool to me, by the way. Compared to that fried man. Yeah, the one that had the burnt motherboard. It's over-fried.
Quite ironic.
Okay, well, here we go at the start of the important part, I guess. What an amp it is as well. Right from the off, you can tell that it's been actually pretty well made. I don't see anything on this this amp that's, well, anything to sniff at, if you know what I mean. It all looks good. And when we go back up in a minute, I'll tell you the sort of list price and compare it to a few other products that I've bought recently, and we'll go from there. But let's just run through it quickly. Well, here we've got the power transformer, and you can always guess the power transformer because it's actually near the power. There it is. Moving along a bit, we've got, well, let's go to the other end because this is the output transformer. And once again, it's near, usually, the outputs. That usually adds up. In any case, this power transformer does actually support a lot of volts, but more about that when we get inside in a bit. Because you might be able to buy one of these from somewhere else where it's cheaper and flip a few things, and then you don't spend all the money. Yeah, you can have a bit spare for a Schecter guitar or something. That sounds like a plan. Levi's just bought one. Okay, well, let's go a little bit further. We've got a number of tubes in here, preamp tubes, a pi tube, for balancing these two off against each other. Sort of. We'll leave it at that for now. It doesn't really matter. But if I was to go and get a tube out, well, let's have a look what we've got. Okay, let's take a look at the, well, this one over here. There are differences on here. There's actually, by the way, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's one over there at the far side that you didn't see, but you'll get to see it in a moment. It was hiding. Now what you've got here, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending who you are, if you're Chinese, you'll love these tubes. And if you're not Chinese, well, that's what you got. Chinese tubes. Some people love them, some people swear by them, and some people swear at them if the amplifier gets damaged through using one. Now I can tell you that this one, this one, this one and this one are all the same. But when we come to this one and the one that's further over there, you can just about see it there if you look careful. Let's take a look at one of those two. You can just tell there's something different about this. It's got a piece of rubber stuck in the top. Yeah. So let's pull the tube out. As you can see, this tube, as well as the one at the other side of the output transformer, are Russian tubes. None of this Chinese crap for the output. That's what I say. Well, actually, it's the input. It is the input. stage 1 and 2. So the better quality tubes are there, right there on the input, and the cheap, nastier ones, I'll call them that, follow on. Oh, what a surprise. Now looking down here, you've got the pi tube, which, as I said, sort of balances between the two to give you a nice sine wave that's balanced both sides on its output. However, I'm not worried about that. That's another cheap Chinese preamp tube, and they look to me to be all 12AX7s, by the way, or ECC83s, or call them what you will, but that's what they are. You've also got these two output tubes, which are 6L6 GCs, and the thing about these, well, I should say 6L6s because it doesn't actually tell you exactly what they are. It rambles on about 6L6 for sure, but doesn't give you any other characters after that, which makes it a nondescript sort of thing unless I go looking in manuals. But that's okay, I haven't got a problem with that. I notice also that they're using really decent belt-on tube clamps, and I can tell you now, I put these into the triple rectifier, and they like having well, they like having alligators holding the things in place. Yeah, very tough belt-on clamps. But these tubes, they're Chinese once again, and I think that's, you know, just a fact of life these days, that you're going to end up with a lot of Chinese tubes. Well, you are. I'm not, because I've got better tubes than these. I've got some, you know, Russian-made decent stuff, or I've got tubes from TAD, which are matched, looked at very, very carefully, and yeah, you couldn't really want for a better tube because they've all been tested almost to extinction, and then you plug them in here and they don't fail. What a great idea. Now on the rest of the amp, just taking a quick look over it, I like to see things like this. You know, you've got little bits of paint on the screws that sort of, well, they do two things. They do. When they're building the machines, they actually show that there's been care taken to ensure that they're tight, because that's like a marker to say they're tight. But it's also helps to keep the nuts on the threads, and you don't see that on too many products. I don't think that was on the last amp I reviewed. Also note something else I like to see. If you look really carefully on the top of this surface, you'll see there's sort of captive nuts that are actually been fitted into the chassis, and they're sort of moulded into the hardware, and they'll be used underneath the other side when we turn it over in a moment. All good stuff. And by the way, this chassis, it seems to be similar thickness to that of Marshall. Very similar thickness. It's a bigger, more spread out chassis, I think, than some of the amps that I've seen. A lot of them are narrower this way, if you get me. And this amp is a bit of an exception. It's actually quite wide. In fact, this is wider than a 100-watt Marshall hand-wired. But that's enough of taking a look up here. I mean, there's little to say except that, you know, these transformers are pretty good quality. They finished off well enough, and they've all been, well, finished with clear lacquer, probably to stop them rusting in 20 years' time and things like that. And this has got a nice finish on the top as well, probably to stop it rusting, like I said, in 20 or 30 years' time, because this amp will probably still be going. Maybe need some work, but we'll find out when we look underneath. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. Let's flip her over and take a look underneath. Okay, well, here's some of the first views of inside the amp, and as you can see, it's a generally well laid out amp. Actually, you've got a number of daughter boards, as you can see, around the amp, and those help tremendously if you've got any real issues that pop up later. In particular, this one up here, and the reason for that is that this one here looks after the biasing, and it's also got the two main power tubes, the 6L6s, and also the other one that's like a balancing or pi tube. I think that's a very good way of doing things, keeping that separate from the main board. So we can think of the main board down here really is, well, a preamp board, which is really what it is. We've got power supply also on it, so it meets a number of requirements, and there are a lot of things that it covers in this this preamp board. And notice down at the front you've got another little board that's got the dual concentrics on it, and I suspect that's the reason why that's there, because it would have been a little bit harder or more awkward maybe to do it differently. Yeah, all very interesting stuff. What do you think? Now, first things first on here, what we do really want to think about is voltages and things like that, and I'm going to discuss this because I think I should. I've got a subscriber on YouTube named Rubber Duck Tech. Now, some people will have heard of him, but some people wouldn't. And what he was good for, I thought was excellent really, was he made a video all about this series of amps. Not just this model, I don't think. I think there are other models that are similar. But you need to check his channel, Rubber Duck Space Tech, T-E-C-H I think it is. It'll be down in the text below, and you need to go and have a look at that if you've got one of these, because it could save your amp from a lot of damage, particularly as we move forward over time. And it all relates to the voltages of the amplifier. On the back of the amp, as you can see very clearly, it's marked up as 230 volts, which is fine all in itself, but it does have a bit of a problem, does that, because the UK isn't 230 volts. And I don't think it's Australia or Singapore, or there's loads of other places around the world that are not 230 volts. Of course, Europe is, and that's where this amp was imported to, most likely. So it leaves us with a dilemma really, because when you've got 230 volt power in settings and you push 240 volts into it, what that actually does is effectively it'll increase the internal voltage from where it should be. So if you put 240 volts into this thing, well, the voltages in the rest of it will be correct. But imagine having that transformer set up, a power transformer set up for 230 volts, and then you put 240 in. Well, I don't know that as a percentage, but let's say it's 5%. Well, that'll actually increase the voltages on the board, likely, I'm not the best at this, Rubber Duck Tech is, to somewhere of a level that could be problematic over time. Remember, if you're pushing more volts in than what the circuit's designed for, well, you've got the components and everything else that could suffer. And he made this this very important video, link from the text below, on how you get around that if you're in the UK or in Australia or Singapore or anywhere else, anywhere where you have 240 volts and this amp is 230 volts in. So hats off to Rubber Duck Tech. Let me just show you roughly, I'm not going to show you too much about it, I'm going to do this one, but really I just want to talk about it. What you've got is you've got this white wire here, you can see it. And behind that, well, at the side of it, you've got this one here. And if you can see, it's got a sort of black line down it. So it's a white one with a black line down it. Well, that's your 230 volt one, and it connects to the board just underneath down here on one of the connectors. And what you have to do is you disconnect that one and you plug this white one in its place, and that'll correct all the mistake of 230 volt power supply but 240 volts in. And I think that's a really great little tip from Rubber Duck Tech. So great on that one. That's definitely important. So what are we going to look at next? Well, there's a whole plethora of stuff that we could go looking at, but I'm going to start the easiest place I could, and that's over this side, which is really relating to power supply. The mains transformer is up here, and it comes in and it goes down there and it goes this way too. And I'm not too worried about any of that. That's pretty par for the course in my opinion. But the first thing I noticed, I'd start at this end, is you've got this big metal plate across here that's actually bolted to the PCB. You've got these two things here which look like sort of voltage regulators to me. They may or may not be, but I think they are. Doesn't really matter whether I'm exactly right or I'm exactly wrong. Doesn't matter. What does matter is that that aluminium plate with these on is going to get warm, and that's why it's made of aluminium. It's a conductive thing, but it's actually bolted to the board, and that will warm the board up. So yeah, not the best answer, that isn't. Why they didn't bolt it to the chassis? Well, who knows? Who knows? I'm not a designer. So that's the first thing out of the way. Second thing is, if you look across here, you look at these capacitors. In fact, you can take a look at all of the capacitors on the board, and every one of them is this brand here. They're called IC brand, if you look careful there. I might even have a picture or two on board. IC. The IC brand is not the best brand in the world. If they were F&Ts, which is a sort of German made, or at least a German brand, who knows where they made, real quality capacitors, that'd be another story. But you've got to understand that the amp is relatively cheap. It's £1,050 at full list price, including 20% of tax. So, you know, it's built, I wouldn't say it's built down to a price, because it isn't. They just use cheaper components, I guess, for profitability. That's my simple-minded opinion. Okay, so you could change all them out. There's a lot to change, so I don't see anybody doing that. And I suspect these will last for a fair number of years, and certainly past any warranty, which we'll talk about warranty later. So they're nothing to be worried about right now, and they're certainly no worse than some of the ones I've seen in recent amplifiers, and that says a lot. Now I also want to talk about this here. This is one of those ceramic capacitors. It's 390 ohms, and it's a 10 watt device. So that's going to get hot, right? And you can see here that it's actually lifted off the board. There's a hole in the board, by the way, and I can see straight through it. You can see that. So it's well lifted off the board. In fact, it's very similar to what Marshall would do, that is. And that is what I would expect from any tube amp maker that has a clue of what they're doing. When you take this and you mount them hard on the board, as I have seen a number of manufacturers do, that is a recipe to warm the board up or heat the board up, could be quite dramatically, and I don't think that's a good thing for any longevity of the product, particularly, you know, over time. And you'll be the person that pays the bill. Yeah, they won't. They'll just mount it on the board. It'll heat up wherever it is, and so on and so forth. Now, importantly, if you go and have a look at a Marshall Studio, any of the 20 watt series, you'll see them. They're like £700 retail. All of them. There's none of this, you know, mount on the board rubbish that I've seen really of recent times over the last year or two. I think that's crazy. So Marshall can do it. Clearly this company can do it. It's clearly common practice among people that care. Oh, yours is mounted on the PCB. Well, go and ask your maker why he's mounted them on the PCB rather than doing a job like that, which is absolutely, in my opinion, perfect. And there's another general viewpoint about having things raised off the PCB. If you have a look across this board, and there'll be pictures probably on screen, you'll notice that nearly all of the resistors are mounted flat on the board, even the bigger ones, and the bigger ones usually denote higher wattage rating. You'll find that generally speaking on this PCB that they're all mounted flat on the board. However, if you come up here, you can see up here, this one and this one in particular are raised off the board. You see that? Now they don't do that for no reason. I'll refer you again to the Marshall amp, and any of the little tiny wattage resistors are mounted on the board just like this. It's There's nothing wrong with that. But as soon as you come to the bigger ones, like these, or these, they're all raised off the board. And the reason is, it's all very simple. They're raised off the board because of temperature. They're going to get hotter. Bigger, fatter, hotter. Yeah, how hard is that to understand? Well, it isn't. It's absolutely so basic. So when you're putting big resistors on a board, well, clearly, it's going to heat that area up if they are the big fat ones. The little tiny ones, not really of any consequence. Well, what else can I say about this thing? It's got a number of relays. You can see them here. We might zoom in a bit closer in a minute. And there's also 2 down here. So that actually makes 1, 2, 3, 4 that I can see just easily. There might be more hidden away somewhere, who knows. But there's at least 4 of them. One other thing I like to see as well, you'll notice that on these sort of wires that are sitting here, that they've actually got the shielded wire. And usually you'll have one end of the shield that is sort of grounded off to something, and the other end is isolated, just as that wire there is there. And you can see it quite clearly, as you can on the other ones that are like that. Some of them are grounded, but at the other end there's only the centre core, and that reduces noise quite considerably. Now some makers do that, and certainly I've even built amplifiers myself and done that, and it does make quite a difference to noise. And when you've got a lot of wires floating around, it's always it's a good thing to see, that is. And here we are on a relatively low cost amplifier. You know, £1,000 or so isn't would never break the bank. Now you can't easily see these pots down the front here, but I'm going to put a few photographs on the screen as we go, and you'll see them yourself. They're not the highest quality of pots in the world. I can't see the brand on them. It looks like TF or something like that. Can't really make out the brands of them. So they're an average, not very high quality pot. They would have been nicer if they'd been CT pots. And I do know that on the Friedman amp I looked at recently, the Friedman pots had little jumpers so you could change the pots easily. And that, you know, credit to them for that, but not so much credit to this company for these. But this is a very common thing these days, is this sort of small sized pot, and it's got strengthening tags on the board, as you can well see. So it is what it is. You've got those dual concentrics as well. You can see they're sort of in this area and in that area over there. So once again, those are pretty specialised pots. They're not sort of your average run-of-the-mill. But there they are, and they're mounted on the PCB. Now across the back here, this board here looks after the, what does it look after? It looks after the preamp out, the effects loop, the MIDI and headphones. So nice that is, because any problem you can either fix it, or you could even make a new board, I guess. These days you can even, you know, if you could draw one yourself, if you're good enough to do that, it's very, very easy to get them, even one board made in China these days. I hate to say it, but that's the way it is. Why they can't get made in America, or they can't get made in England, or even in Europe, is beyond me. And how anybody's allowed all that to happen over these times, it's absolutely ridiculous. There are steps afoot to change that, I believe, but we shall see, won't we, because it takes 2 to 3 years to make factories. Now I've really covered all these boards. We've just done that one. This one, like I said, is really like a power board. I'd relate it to being a power board. What I'm really trying to say is this, that although you can see the sockets soldered there, you can clearly see them. These sockets here, these power tube sockets, are not actually soldered to this board as you might think. They're actually fitted to the chassis with extending connectors that stick through here. So it's not quite the same as what you'd see when you get a power tube socket mounted directly on the board. It's not like that at all, and I think that's a good compromise situation compared to the sort of tube amps, PV Mace, I always remember because I owned one, that had 4 tubes across it totaling 160 watts and it'd melt the PCB. There's nothing like that here, and indeed that's credit to them to design it this way. In my opinion, it's just an opinion, but I doubt this is going to get the sort of temperatures in the way that you might think, you might otherwise think. So it's well worth coming and having a look at this sort of thing. Love it. I think it's great. Now I am going to show you the one thing that I found that was actually trouble. Well, it wasn't trouble, but it could be. If you look at this ST17 screw here, I'm going to put a picture on screen of how it used to be. Because when they screwed this one in, here, they screwed it in sort of semi cross-threaded. And it was half screwed in and there was a big gap underneath. Now, the reason that's important to me is this, that firstly, that screw there has very clearly got a grounding around it and under it. So it's important that it's tight for grounding in that area, in my opinion. I could be wrong, I've got no diagrams or anything, but I can see where it's been on most of these screws. They've all got it. So I think they're like little grounding points. And it was loose, not loose like it's going to fall out, but loose, semi-cross-threaded, if you get me. So the real truth of it is that I unscrewed that and I put it back in straight, the way it should be, and it very easily went all the way in and tightened up, and that was the end of that little problem. But it is a problem that was there. I wanted to draw your attention to it. It's not the sort of problem that I'm really worried about. The ones I get worried about, and like I saw in the Friedman app, that bodge in the middle of the board was, well, unquestionably ridiculous. This, well, it's just a mistake. They're made in Mexico. But this company quite rightly mentions where the amp's made, and good luck to them, and they proudly say that it's made in Mexico, and I don't have that much of a problem with this amp and its quality, really, other than maybe the component level, you know, the brands and things like that. So that was the one flaw I did find, even though it says here finished and tested and all the rest of it. That was the point I wanted to raise. I think if there's anything I could say, anything further regarding, you know, how it's made and the design and all the rest of it, I think if you had any pretty major problem, and you could have over the years, it should last a long time, this amp. But this preamp board, I'll call it a preamp board, power board, I/O board, and front control board. I think, you know, you've got a bit of trouble pulling it out. If you need to pull it out and stuff like that. So, you know, it's like anything else, isn't it? I've seen some amps that, you know, techs complain about morning, noon and night. Mesa Boogie in particular, they all complain. I never really complained about them. I've seen the odd fault on one that was, well, actually abused, and I bought it, and, you know, that sort of thing. But I don't know, it doesn't look too bad to me, but I'm not sitting there every day fixing them. My advice, if you want to know any more about this, I'm only giving you my opinion, remember that. And if you hop over to Rubber Duck Tech, I know he's got a few different videos on different stuff, and I think he's got others on this amp. And yeah, definitely worth going and having a look. I've looked at them, but I've looked at so many different technical sort of, you know, overviews these days, you forget who's done what. But on this mod here, I always remember Rubber Duck Tech, because it's a really great job he did. Yeah. Not much left to cover now. This here, I think, relates to the MIDI. I think that's the where the data's stored for the MIDI, which sort of comes off this way and goes off that way, and, well, goes wherever it goes. But that's what I think that is. Yeah, you've got MIDI on this, and I like that. That's a very useful thing. I like this as well. This is a bit bulky, to say the very least. Yeah. Well, what is it? Well, inside there, you can see there's a whole bunch. They're like donuts stuck together. There's a number of them, maybe, or it may be one big fat one. But they're like a sort of ferrite material that these wires go through, and it helps to stop the hum. Yeah, that's usually the criteria. Stop the hum. But I haven't seen one quite like that before on any amp really, and I've seen a lot of amps. So there it is. They clearly had some issues with noise, and I'm not surprised with the amount of preamp tubes that this thing's got. You know, it's got a huge number of preamp tubes. What we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus the tube up here for the balancing. Yeah, the pi tube. Yeah, so it's a very, very driven amp. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? It's Eddie's. Now, I've only got one more thing to say now, and then we're going to move on and look at the back and front. But I want to draw your attention to this up here. Now, this is not a serial number. This is actually a build number of a run. So imagine you're going to make 230 of these chassis. Well, this chassis here is number 2 chassis out of 230. Now, I'm not saying it is or it isn't literally number 2 amp. I could never tell you that. And neither could you tell me that, unless you actually work at Fender in Mexico and you can tell me the whole series, which I doubt any of you can. But the thing, what I'd like to say is this: if it is number 2 out of the first run, yeah, bear with me on this. Who do you think's got number 1? Yeah, probably Eddie. So, well, there it is. You can see it on the screen yourself right now, so I'm not making anything up. Now, that doesn't relate in any way to the serial number of the amp. So if you see the serial number at any time while we're whizzing round, ignore that. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is amp number 2 out of 230 of a production run at the factory. And if it is number 2, I've got the really good idea that Eddie's got number 1. So there. Oh, you don't agree with me? Well, so what? Put your opinion down below. It's so funny. Well, now I'm getting a little bit bored with this. I don't think there's much else I can really point you to. I'm going to go and do the mod on here that Rubber Duck Tech raised about that. And I think that was a very good thing. And yeah, not much else. That's it. Hope you've enjoyed looking inside. I think it's pretty cool. I like the chassis thickness as well. This is sort of Marshall thickness, which is not bad. Yeah, I like to see that sort of thing for sure, don't you? None of them flimsy boards. And it's got the end covers on as well, which on some of the cheaper Marshalls they don't have. But on some of them they do. So, yeah. Okay, well, here we are around the back. And the first thing to note, as Rubber Duck Tech said, is there it is, input power 230 volts. So don't forget to go and have a look at his video, because he does a much better job of that than I do. But importantly, they mark it as 230. It is 240, at least here. Yeah. And they have a fuse here, F2AL, 250 volts fuse. Well, if you're on 240, that's, you go and figure. We've got a power on and a power off, and a standby on and a standby off. We can even have a set of headphones in the back of this, which I thought was pretty unusual, really. You don't see that many with a headphone connector. I mean, how good's that? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, put your headphones on with that, wouldn't you?
You would.
Yeah, you would, yeah. There's a MIDI in, so it's controllable by a MIDI, which I always like to see. It doesn't cost that much in manufacture to add that sort of thing, and well, you can do a huge thing, a number of things with that. This is where the foot switch goes, and the foot switch is provided. I'll be showing you that later. We've got an effects loop here with a send and return. It says here, well, it's rambling on about ventilation underneath, but don't worry about that. More about the send and return a bit later. I think it's series. I think it's a series loop. You don't want one of the others. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's series. Well, interesting. We've got the preamp out, which we can take this preamp with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tubes in it, plus the other one. Yeah, we can go and feed that into another amp, and yeah, could be good. You'll be loud, make no mistake of that. Along here, you've got the bias adjuster that's been blocked off for people like me and you, so we don't mess with it. And there's a plus and minus where we can put the meter and things and balance this up, or bias the amp up, should I say. We've also got a very important knob here called the resonance. Yeah, and that does a lot for the amp, just trust me on that. Moving a bit further, you've got the 4/8 or 16 ohm load impedance, and at the end we've got the parallel speaker outputs, 4 ohm minimum, total 50 watts, and I think Rob Ducktech was talking about these, and he said always connect to this one first. It might not have been him, because I do look at a number of videos of this style. So in here, yeah, that's first and that's second. That's what he said. And if it wasn't him, well, it's somebody else. What else have we got along here? Type PR1045. I don't even know what that means, do you?
I don't know.
He doesn't know what it means either. No, I'm not surprised. It's a 5153 50 watt S for stealth EVH, a product of Fender Musical Instrument Corporation, I think that stands for, Corona, California, USA, and it's made in Mexico, and there it is, marked on here, well, with pride. There's not much more you can say. It's also got a little bit further along here, it's got this WE sign, which is a standard regarding which bin you throw it in, that sort of thing. This 10 in a circle is another standard for somewhere around the world, I forget where. So here's a quick overall shot of the front of the chassis, that is, and you can see the tubes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and don't forget the 7th one down there. A lot of tubes, especially I haven't seen many amps with more tubes than that, except for the Tony Iommi amp from the TI-100 from Laney, and you can mark my words, that is the highest output amp I have ever seen. Okay, here we are around the front. Let's go from the top. Well, this is the main insert. This is where you put your guitar. It's pretty obvious, really. What more can I say about that? Well, not a lot. But moving along to the next thing here, we've got basically between that switch there and here, it's channel 1 and channel 2. Now, channel 1 has a little LED there that lights up as green, and when you're in channel 2 by switching this, it'll light up as blue. That's simple enough. Now, on this adjuster for gain, you've got actually a thing called a dual concentric pot. You can see it there. The inner one, this aluminium, can turn around, but you know, you can see there, it's got a sort of little white line on it. That would have been nicer in red, so that you could really make it out, rather than white on aluminium does not work too well. Anyway, the inside one works for the clean channel, and the outside one works for the sort of medium gain. You've then got low, mid and high, which is pretty obvious because that all relates to tone, really. It's simple enough to figure out. You've got another dual concentric pot here, you see, and the inner one again has this white line, which is a bit of a pain in the neck, or a pain in the behind even. But the inner one again handles the clean channel, and the outer one handles the volume for the you know, the half gain channel. I'll call it that, but it's more than that. Yeah. This manually selects between the two, and it's green for channel 1 and blue for channel 2. Now I do want to mention, I've got a friend, Mr. Latham. He knows who he is, and he loves these sort of amps, and he was telling me of some of the problems that he used to have with his amp and what he didn't like about it and things like that. And one of the main things that he didn't like was this relating to what was on one channel you got on the next. So if I remember right, they didn't have these concentrics on the earlier ones, and you were stuck with, if that was the volume there, well, that was the volume for both channels. Well, that was the gain, well, that was the gain for both channels. And that, these three here, you're still stuck with these three here for whatever the tone is for these two channels, because it's shared. And he was saying that could be a bit of a pain of all the sharing these sort of things, you know. That was his main criticism at the time, if I remember. But of course it's all been fixed in this one. Well, semi-fixed. Okay, well, moving along, we move into, well, one of the most important channels, depending on what you play. Oh, you ready? Well, you'll be on channel 3. Here it is. And what we've got from this point onwards is all about channel 3, like I said. Interestingly, something I didn't point out earlier, but if you look down the bottom here on this chicken head, you've got off or up. So according to that, I can take the low and turn it off or bring it up. Well, whether they're actually turned off in the circuit's another story. But if you turn them all off, you'll have more gain, because usually tone stacks take away gain. And if you remember the Bogner Brixton that had virtually no tone stacks, and I think that had got a couple of preamp tubes, something like that. I think it's got more gain than almost any amp I've seen. Incredible. In any case, looking across them, you've got channel 3 gain, you've got low, mid and high, once again, and a separate volume for that channel. And you've got a select here, which selects channel 3. And one interesting thing about this, when you switch back out of this channel 3, when you flip back to the other channels down there, those are back into the state they were in when you left. So if you were in the blue channel and you flipped across to this, when you come back out of this, you're back in a blue channel. That's the thing to remember. You've also got this little light at the end. Well, I'll call it a little light. It's bright enough probably to light up the universe. Look at it. Huge thing. Just while we're around the front here, if you look at these two select buttons, this one and this one, if you press these two at the same time, it turns the amp into what's called a MIDI learning mode. And yeah, the current amp channel LED will flash. You can send any desired program change message on any desired channel from a MIDI controller to the amp. The channel 1 LED green will start to flash until the program change message has previously been assigned to a different amp channel, in which case the LED for previously assigned channel will start to flash. You can select the target amp, channel 1, 2 or 3, using the channel select buttons E and I. All 3 amp channel LEDs will briefly illuminate to indicate if the amp channel assignment has been changed for the program change message sent. If the amp channel assignment hasn't been changed, which would be the case when assigning amp channel 1 to a program change message for the very first time, the 3 amp channel LEDs will not illuminate briefly. Because the amp channel assignment hasn't changed because from the default amp channel 1 assignment. If the program change message is currently assigned to amp channel 1, which is the default, the channel 1 to select button E must be pressed twice to select the amp channel 2. If the program change message is currently assigned to amp channel 2, the channel 1 and 2 select button E must be pressed twice to select the amp channel 1. And basically what happens is you repeat steps 2 and 3 for each channel on the amp if desired. In any case, there's a huge amount of things that you can do with MIDI on this device. You can even bypass the loop, yeah, for the effects. There's far more about the MIDI online and all the rest of it. I'm not going to bore you anymore with that for now. Okay, well, what we've got set up here is the amplifier has been converted as rubber duck tech said, and it's sitting there with its light on running and it's in standby. I've got a dummy load down on the floor. You can see it comes out on a 16 ohm setting, which is what I've got for the Mesa Boogie cab clone, which works very nice as a dummy load. That's what I've got to say anyway. I want to just check what the bias is now before I go any further, so that's what I'm going to go have a look at. And as you can see on the meter there, it's doing about 41.5 on the old bias. I haven't adjusted anything, but do remember that the input voltage was adjusted a little bit and things like that. Now I am going to be fitting a set of TAD 606GC STR selected. These are selected and matched and all the rest of it, and they're about as good as you can get. These are very subtle difference between these and what came out. These are what I recommend anyway, and I've never had any troubles at all with them. So I'm going to fit them now. And as you can clearly see, there they are in situ, all raring to go. So let's see how they do. Okay, well I'm back. Yeah, what can I say? These tubes, by the way, that I've got fitted are they're basically 6L6GC STRs, the black plate RCA style, and the TAD Premium selected. They don't discontinued now, I might say that, and they've got the new one, 6L6GC M, I think they are, STRM, something like that. But these classic 6L6s are really a brilliant choice for this amp, and I had some lying around, so I just thought it would be, you know, worthwhile doing. They've got the remake of all-time favourite 6L6 classics by the RCA and GE companies. The TAD 6L6s is your perfect choice if you're up to the sound of rock legends, and I am. It provides the low end with the right amount of pressure, as known from the famous RCA tubes. It's got clear, transparent but unobtrusive highs and exactly the right bite to provide you with all those classic 6L6 sounds. From big warm cleans to modern hard rock styles, which, you know, this amp really is. It combines the famous reliability of the American-made Philips or Sylvania STR series, also known as Mesa 6L6GC STR 415s, with the black plate system. Highly regarded vintage RCA 6L6 GC tubes. When they took these, they joined basically the best of both worlds. A nice silky top end combined with deep bass response and lots of headroom make this tube a living classic. It's exclusively a black plate design, gold grid wire, double getter construction, no noise filament, and a 1.2mm thick heavy duty glass envelope, and they really are a great tube if you've got one. These are premium selected that you can get from Tube Amp Doctrine. By the way, I bought these. I'm not promoting something that, you know, somebody's told me to do or anything like that. I'm all based on, you know, what I find. Many people ask me about JJ tubes and things like that. Well, the only tube that I've ever had fail in a power tube is a JJ tube, so I steer away from them every time I can, and with this amp I can. But these premium selected tubes, they've passed a pile of tests such as plate current and amplification, PC and TC, low noise test, microphonic test, sonic test, shock test, listening tests, shorts and leakage tests. And the premium matching is an exact matching of power tubes with identical plate current, PC and transductance. That's what they say. Well, in reality, you know, you always still get a bit of a variance, and I put this bias master on so you can see individual settings, and you can see there's a very slight variance in the milliamp, but it's not that far. This one's 25.4 he gets to, and that's 28.1 or 2, yeah. So it's sort of 2.5 milliamps, and I'm not really worried about any of that, to be honest. I think that's all well and good, isn't it? And if you look over here, this is on 53, and at 53, well, what can I say? It's reasonable. The whole thing's reasonable. I could push it a bit further, but I don't think I want to. This amp will probably sound very fine as it is. Now, I did look at the spec sheet, the technical sheet on this, and they say here it's DC plate voltage 550, grid number 2 DC screen voltage 450, grid number 1 voltage minus 37, 100 milliamp and so on and so forth. And typical operation is, it says here, is 54 milliamps to 66 milliamps, anywhere in between. Well, if you look at the meter on the right, it's sitting near enough 54, yeah. So I'll probably leave it at that, maybe just tweak it up to 54, yeah, and we'll let it go at that. I don't see any real reason to start pushing it too hard. I don't want to do that. I prefer the amp to be reasonable for a long time rather than stonking and a shorter time. So there you have it. Very simple to adjust, by the way. If we move this out of the way, you get your thing in here, just locate it, and you can adjust that up just very easy. And that's the little bit about biasing the amp. And after that adjustment on the input side, which Rubber Duck Tech was talking about, I just thought you'd like to see both of them in comparison. Yeah. Well, there you have it. The EVH 5153 S 6L6 amp. What do you think?
I think he's pretty good, I do.
He thinks he's pretty good. I think he's pretty good too, if you want the truth. But we're like that here. It's when we don't find anything burned inside or stuck on the main board, you know, that are going to heat it up. I thought the capacitors wanted a bit of fixing and things like that. Well, I say fixing. There's nothing to fix today. We'll give it 10 years or so. And then there might well be. So then you'll be in a different position. I hope it's light enough in here, by the way. We've got all the studio lights blasting on us. Yeah. I know I look a bit anemic now. He looks like he's been dead 6 months, but yeah, that's okay. His father says he's got to go in a minute, so the rest of the video won't be with him on. However, I'll probably get him back, because he's the sort of guy that plays this metal stuff, won't you? Yeah. Yeah. Play metal, man. And, you know, he'll probably do some playing. That sounds like a plan to me, because, well, he's got nothing else to do. Nobody else will hang around with him. Will he? No, I don't think they will. No, you know how it goes. So, yeah, I'll do some summing up. He's going to go now, so I'm going to turn the camera off. He's going to sod off, and later today I'll come back and do a bit of summing up, and then it'll be ready for the all-important playing section. And I suppose we could do a sort of who plays best, me or him. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, no, I don't think so. No, he's got better than where he used to be. Which is a pity, really. Yeah. I suppose they've all got to grow up and fly the nest, though, haven't they? Anyway, let's proceed a bit further now with all the basic information and the pricing and the warranty and the summing up and then we'll get to the playing. Well, okay, I haven't been anywhere. I can say I'm back, but well, I am what I am. Well, here we are with it all built back up again. I've carried out the mod to make it 240 volts, thanks to my friend. Yeah, he's very helpful. No question to that. There's a link down in the text, by the way, to his channel. Yeah, very friendly guy. What's new in this amp? Well, I've got the book out because I didn't really know. It says here, professional tube amp meets exacting specifications of EVH, Eddie Van Halen, one of the true living legends. Well, he was, and rest in peace, Eddie. The 5150 S 6L6 50 watt head is a perfect amp for playing Who Wants EVH signature touring tone, it says. Arena volume and performance in a compact package. Arena volume, can you imagine it in your bedroom? Well, you can get those sort of sounds out. in your bedroom. New features that will inspire unlimited artistic expression, it says, include a sparkle clean channel, one that is, and independent dual concentric controls that allow for gain and volume level matching, which was a major problem on the earlier ones, a fact. Channel 2 features increased gain for greater sustain, and channel 3 uses with liquid gain. It's been running out the front. With such fierce tone, it is fierce, and it's hard to say that, uncompromising construction, well, nearly. The result is phenomenal. EVH performance for years to come. Well, depends how many years to do with those capacitors, remember that. Other distinctive features of this ferocious amp include an ultra-high gain preamp design, custom voiced for maximum harmonic content, bias ports with adjustable trim pot, and stealth cosmetics. And it does say on the back, check the manual for the bias settings and the rest of it, but guess what? They're not in here. Why am I surprised? And by the way, the weight of this one, as it says here, is 35 pounds in weight, or 15.9 kilograms if you're in some weird country. Okay, I'm reliably informed that the warranty on EVH gear within the UK and Europe is 2 years. Yeah, not 1 year, not 5 years like it is in America. It's 2 years, and that's down to the distributor of the country, yeah, giving the warranty. So looks to me like Fender make this, they make it with this brand name and the rest of it, but it's actually sold with probably a bought out warranty, which means that Fender won't warranty it, but the distributor does. Old-fashioned way of doing things. Of course, that's never a problem unless you've got problems. Will you get problems with this? Probably not. Well, at least not in any warranty period. I think it'll be substantially longer than that. Yeah. Now, I have actually played a friend's model of one of these. Not exactly the same, but very near. And yeah, very, very powerful amp. And if you're into tapping, I like tapping, then it's probably an amp for you. But you've got to step back a bit and say to yourself, well, what if I'm not into tapping? What if I'm somebody that likes not to tap, for example? What do I do then? You know, where do I go from there? Well, it actually has a sparklingly clean, literally sparklingly clean channel, and that's a very good channel. If you're into cleans and driving with other things, that sort of stuff, it's a very good amp for that. It's a bigger amp than normal as well, than for a small amp, you know. Well, again, it's 50 watt, not a 20 watt, isn't it? You forget that. What else? Well, I like a load of features on this. I didn't like the loose screw, but a loose screw isn't going to literally fall off in 2 seconds. It wasn't that sort of loose. It was sort of semi-crossed. Yeah, I like the MIDI. I think that's good. I like the included pedal as well. It's down there somewhere. I won't bother showing you. It's just a boring pedal. Nothing to that. What don't I like about it? Well, very little. There's so many things I do like about it. I think it's a bargain. Yeah, for the money. And a lot of people will be put off. Trust me, a lot of people will be put off by saying, oh, that's a metal amp. It's not for me, you know. But of course, Eddie Van Halen isn't really metal. He wasn't really the heavy metal stuff. Well, heavier than metal. You know what I mean. He was more classic rock. It was really became classic rock because he went through the years. So where does he leave this? Well, it leaves it as a very capable classic to modern day metal. And I don't mean the detuned stuff so much, although it's probably great for that. I don't know. I'm not one of them guys. But it does leave you in an area where there aren't that many amplifiers like this one. And these improvements, to me, make a whole lot of difference because, as my friend said, oh, It's awful on that, Tony. You can't balance this up when you've got this one right, you've got that one wrong. And I think that's an important aspect to remember if you go and buy an older model. I bought the older model. I've been trying to get rid of it for years. So if you think this amp could be for you, well then watch the playing at the end. I'll be doing something, and Levi will be doing something. He's got an awful lot better these days, and he's into that detuned stuff as well, so maybe you'll get something like that out of him. Or maybe you won't. Who knows? This is the way he is. Yeah, I don't go fighting against him anymore. He's better than me. But then again, he can't do what I do, so. It's horses for courses with music. So where's the score? I'm going to give this one a 9.5 out of 10. Oh, why not a 10 out of 10, Tony? Well, because I found that screw that wasn't quite right. I'm never into that. That shows lack of focus by somebody. Whether it's the final QA guy or the guy that put it in there and knew it was wrong. But I have to say, this amp, I'm not really that concerned. So, and then you've got the capacitors, the capacitor brand, which isn't the best in the world, and I think that also brings it down a little bit. Although they're more of a long-term problem, 10 years or maybe more, before you'll see any real aggro on them, I think. As for the tubes, well, you can pull them all out and throw them in the bin if you want. And yeah. So I'm 9.5, 9.5 out of 10 on this one. The only thing stopped it was that screw. Bearing in mind it's made in Mexico, it's made by Fender, and some people will frown at that. But I've seen amplifiers made in China, or many of the main boards made in China. Some have been good, some have been, well, terrible. But that's the way life is. It's almost a sort of luck of the draw. What helps this one a little bit is it's got a 2-year warranty here in England and in Europe, I believe. But it doesn't help it in the respect that it's got 5 years in America and it's only got 2 years here. I think that's a bit short-changed, really. Especially if you step back and think about the 20% tax we have to pay here. We end up with a 2-year warranty. For an amp that probably costs more for us than it does for you in America. So, as an overall, those are the things that are sort of in the back of my mind. The rest of it, I've no qualms whatsoever in recommending the amp. It's a great amp. And a lot of people would do well to bother to look inside this amp and see how they're made. Okay, well, the playing's going to be coming up anytime soon. Don't forget to have a good look down in the text below, because if there's any information I've gleaned from anywhere, it'll be down in there. Oh, and there's the one last thing I thought was quite interesting. Number 2 in the production line. Now, whether it's the first production line or the second one or the 10th one, who knows? And one thing I do want to say about that, don't bother going look at the amp serial number and saying, and what it says on the outside and the rest of it, it was made in March or April. These were being made since September last year, you will say. There's only one problem with that. I'm talking of the amp number in the chassis run. I'm not talking of any serial number that's added later. It's the amp number in the chassis run. However many there was, 220 or 230, whatever it was, this is number 2. So I just think that's just so funny. And everybody's going to argue with me and tell me that, yeah, well, Tony, you're miles out. But that's okay, because I've got this one and you haven't. Don't forget to go to www.tonymckenzie.com if you want to see some other stuff that I haven't put on YouTube, or there isn't much of on YouTube, and all that sort of thing. And the playing's coming up, and until next time, yeah. I was waiting for this for months on end, 7 months it took to get this amp. Now get out of here. Okay, here's a track that Levi's done his thing with, and he's using his nice new 7-string Schecter through the 5153 Stealth, and he's on the red channel, as you might imagine. Okay, Levi, hit the button. Okay, one or two guys asked about the 5153 Stealth in clean mode. Yeah, very particular about clean mode being demoed. So here it is. I've got Levi here with his Schecter 7-string, and he's just going to play a few chords and mess about in clean mode. Have a go with that, Levi.
Yeah.
Okay, well here we are, part 2, or is it part 1? Whichever way round it is. The other one's Levi, and I represent all the pensioners, right? We're still using the 5150 on channel 3, because it's a channel I like too, and we're going to see how it comes out. But of course I don't play like Levi, I'm a different type of guy, and that's the good thing about it, you'll get 2 different styles from 1 amp. Yeah, sounds like a plan, so here goes.